Little Town on the Prairie, Chapter 8, 4th of July. Boom! Laura was jerked out of sleep. The bedroom was dark. Carrie asked in a thin, scared whisper, "What was that?" "Don't be scared," Laura answered. They listened. The window was hardly gray in the dark, but Laura could feel that the middle of the night was past. Boom! The air seemed to shake. "Great guns!" Pa exclaimed sleepily. Why? Grace demanded. "Pa, Ma, why?" Carrie asked. "Who is it? What are they shooting? What time is it?" Ma wanted to know. Through the partition, Pa answered, "It's 4th of July, Carrie." The air shook again. Boom! It was not great guns. It was gunpowder exploded under the blacksmith's anvil in town. The noise was like the noise of battles that Americans fought for independence. 4th of July was the day when the first Americans declared that all men are born free and equal. Boom! "Come, girls, we might as well get up," Ma called. Pa sang, "Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?" "Charles!" Ma protested, but she was laughing because it really was too dark to see. "It's nothing to be solemn about." Pa jumped out of bed. "Hurry, we're Americans," he sang. "Hooray, hooray, we'll sing the Jubilee. Hooray, hooray, the flag that sets men free." Even the sun, as it rose, shining into the clearest of skies, seemed to know this day was the glorious 4th. At breakfast, Ma said, "This would be the perfect day for a 4th of July picnic." "Maybe the town will be far enough along to have one come next July," said Pa. "We couldn't hardly have a picnic this year anyway," Ma admitted. "It wouldn't seem like a picnic without fried chicken." After such a rousing beginning, the day did seem empty. Such a special day seemed to expect some special happening, but nothing special could happen. "I feel like dressing up," Carrie said while they did the dishes. "So do I, but there's nothing to dress up for," Laura replied. When she carried out the dishwater to throw it far from the house, she saw Pa looking at the oats. They were growing thick and tall, gray-green and smoothly rippling in the wind. The corn was growing lustily too. Its long, yellow-green, fluttering leaves almost hid the broken sod. In the garden, the cucumber vines were reaching out, their crawling tips uncurling beyond patches of spreading big leaves. The rows of peas and beans were rounding up. The carrot rows were feathery green, and the beets were thrusting up long, dark leaves on red stems. The ground cherries were already small bushes. Through the wild grasses, the chickens were scattered, chasing insects to eat. All this was satisfaction enough for an ordinary day, but for 4th of July, there should be something more. Pa felt the same way. He had nothing to do, for on 4th of July, no work could be done except the chores and housework. In a little while, he came into the house and said to Ma, "There's a kind of celebration in town. Would you like to go?" "What kind of celebration?" Ma asked. "Well, mostly for horse racing, but they took up a collection for lemonade," Pa replied. "Women are not likely to be at a horse race," Ma said, "and I couldn't go calling, uninvited, on 4th of July. Laura and Carrie stood almost bursting with eagerness while Ma considered and shook her head. "You go along, Charles. It would be too much for Grace anyway." "It is much nicer at home," said Mary. Then Laura spoke. "Oh, Pa, if you go, can't Carrie and I?" Pa's doubtful eyes brightened and twinkled at her and Carrie. Ma smiled on them. "Yes, Charles, it will be a nice outing for you all," she said. "Run down cellar and bring up the butter, Carrie, and while you're dressing, I'll put up some bread and butter for you to take along." Suddenly, the day seemed really 4th of July. Ma made sandwiches. Pa blacked his boots. Laura and Carrie hurriedly dressed up. Luckily, Laura's sprigged calico was freshly washed and ironed. She and Carrie took turns at the wash basin, scrubbing their faces and necks and ears pink. Over their unbleached muslin union suits, they put on crackling stiff petticoats of bleached muslin. They brushed and braided their hair. Laura wound her heavy braids around her head and pinned them. She tied the Sunday hair ribbon on the ends of Carrie's braids. Then she put on her fresh sprigged calico and buttoned it up the back. The full ruffle on the bottom of the skirt came down to the tops of her shoes. "Please button me up," Carrie asked. In the middle of her back, there were 2 buttons that she couldn't reach. She had buttoned all the others outside in. "You can't wear your buttons turned inside at a 4th of July celebration," said Laura, unbuttoning them all and buttoning them up again properly. "If they're outside, they keep pulling my hair," Carrie protested. "My braids catch on them." "I know, mine always did," said Laura, "but you just have to stand it till you're big enough to put your hair up." They put on their sunbonnets. Pa was waiting, holding the brown paper packet of sandwiches. Ma looked at them carefully and said, "You look very nice." "It's a treat to me to be stepping out with my 2 good-looking girls," said Pa. "You look nice too, Pa," Laura told him. His boots were glossily polished, his beard was trimmed, and he was wearing his Sunday suit and broad-brimmed felt hat. "I want to go," Grace demanded. Even when Ma said, "No, Grace," she repeated 2 or 3 times, "I want to." Because she was the baby, they had almost spoiled her. Now her unruliness must be nipped in the bud. Pa had to set her sternly in a chair and tell her, "You heard your ma speak." They set out soberly, unhappy about Grace, but she must be taught to mind. Perhaps next year she could go, if there were a big celebration and they all rode in the wagon. Now they were walking, to let the horses stay on their picket ropes and eat grass. Horses grow tired standing all day at hitching posts in dust and heat. Grace was too little to walk the mile and back, and she was too big to be carried. Even before they reached town, they could hear a sound like corn popping. Carrie asked what it was, and Pa said it was firecrackers. Horses were tied along the whole length of Main Street. Men and boys were so thick on the sidewalk that in places they almost touched each other. Boys were throwing lighted firecrackers into the dusty street where they sizzled and exploded. The noise was startling. "I didn't know it would be like this," Carrie murmured. Laura did not like it either. They had never been in such a crowd before. There was nothing to do but keep on walking up and down in it, and to be among so many strangers made them uncomfortable. Twice they walked the 2 blocks with Pa, and then Laura asked him if she and Carrie could not stay in his store building. Pa said that was a fine idea. They could watch the crowd while he circulated a little. Then they would eat their lunch and see the races. He let them into the empty building, and Laura shut the door. It was pleasant to be alone in the echoing bare place. They looked at the empty kitchen behind it, where they had all lived huddled during the long, hard winter. They tiptoed upstairs to the hollow, hot bedrooms under the eaves of the shingle roof, and stood looking down from the front window at the crowd and at the firecrackers squirming and popping in the dust. "I wish we had some firecrackers," Carrie said. "They're guns," Laura pretended. "We're in Fort Ticonderoga, and those are British and Indian. We're Americans fighting for independence." "It was the British in Fort Ticonderoga, and the Green Mountain Boys took it," Carrie objected. "Then I guess we're with Daniel Boone in Kentucky, and this is a log stockade," said Laura. "Only the British and Indians captured him," she had to admit. "How much do firecrackers cost?" Carrie asked. "Even if Pa could afford them, it's foolish to spend money just to make a little noise," Laura said. "Look at that little bay pony. Let's pick out the horses we like best. You can have first choice." There was so much to see that they could hardly believe it was noon when Pa's boots sounded downstairs and he called, "Girls, where are you?" They rushed down. He was having a good time. His eyes were twinkling bright. He sang out, "I've brought us a treat, smoked herring to go with our bread and butter, and look what else." He showed them a bunch of firecrackers. "Oh, Pa," Carrie cried, "how much did they cost?" "Didn't cost me a cent," said Pa. "Lawyer Barnes handed them to me, said to give them to you girls." "Why on earth did he do that?" Laura asked. She had never heard of Lawyer Burns before. "Oh, he's going in for politics, I guess," said Pa. "He acts that way, affable and agreeable to everybody. You want me to set these off for you now or after we eat?" Laura and Carrie were thinking the same thing. They knew it when they looked at each other, and Carrie said it. "Let's save them, Pa, to take them home to Grace." "All right," said Pa. He put them in his pocket and undid the smoked herring while Laura opened the packet of sandwiches. The herring was delicious. They saved some to take home to Ma. When they had eaten the last bit of bread and butter, they went out to the well and drank, long and deep, from the edge of the pail that Pa drew dripping up. Then they washed their hands and their hot faces and dried them on Pa's handkerchief. It was time to go to the races. The whole crowd was moving across the railroad tracks and out on the prairie. On a pole set up there, the American flag fluttered against the sky. The sun was shining warm and a cool breeze blowing. Beside a flagpole, a man rose up tall above the crowd. He was standing on something. The sound of talking died down and he could be heard speaking. "Well, boys," he said, "I'm not much good at public speaking, but today's the glorious 4th. This is the day and date when our forefathers cut loose from the despots of Europe. There wasn't many Americans at that time, but they wouldn't stand for any monarch tyrannizing over them. They had to fight the British regulars and their hired Hessians and the murdering scalps redskin savages that those fine gold-laced aristocrats turned loose on our settlements and paid for murdering and burning and scalping women and children. A few barefoot Americans had to fight the whole of them and lick 'em. And they did fight them, and they did lick 'em. Yes, sir, we licked the British in 1776, and we licked 'em again in 1812, and we're backed all the monarchies of Europe out of Mexico and off this continent less than 20 years ago, and by glory, yes, sir, by old glory, right here waving over my head. Any time the despots of Europe try to step on America's toes, we'll lick 'em again." "Hurry, hurry," everybody shouted. Laura and Carrie and Pa yelled too. "Hurry, hurry," in a minute. "Well, so here we are today," the man went on. "Every man, jack of us, a free and independent citizen of God's country, the only country on earth where a man is free and independent. Today's the 4th of July when this whole thing was started, and it ought to have a bigger, better celebration than this. We can't do much this year. Most of us are out here trying to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. By next year, likely some of us will be better off and able to chip in for a real big rousing celebration of Independence Day. Meantime, here we are. It's 4th of July, and on this day, somebody's got to read the Declaration of Independence. Looks like I'm elected, so hold your hats, boys. I'm going to read it." Laura and Carrie knew the Declaration by heart, of course, but it gave them a solemn, glorious feeling to hear the words. They took hold of hands and stood listening in the solemnly listening crowd. The stars and stripes were fluttering bright against the thin, clear blue overhead, and their minds were saying the words before their ears heard them. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bonds which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that